Welcome to Claim Your Confidence, a podcast that will introduce you to the most powerful people in the world. No matter what obstacles you face, Claim Your Confidence will inspire and motivate you to go after the life you want. Are you ready to claim your confidence?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Claim Your Confidence. I'm Lydia Fenet, coming to you from Rockefeller Center. And guys, spring is here, finally. You know how I feel about warm weather, and I think everyone in New York is in a much better mood than we have been for the past couple of months. And I'm in the best mood because seated across from me is a powerhouse woman who you will certainly know if you tune in to Fox News. Harris Faulkner is about to celebrate the 10th anniversary of her hit Fox News program, Outnumbered. Starting off, she made history back in 2014 as the first Black woman to helm a weekday cable news program. She has won, not two, but 6 Emmys, has written multiple books, and currently anchors 2 daily daytime programs, the Faulkner Focus, and serves as the co-anchor of Outnumbered. Harris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, it's so special to be here. I just have to tell your listeners, and I guess some people can see us, that was your mom's voice off the top.
I know.
And that was so cool. And then we're like in this place, like, look at that guy, you can wave to him. I've never been to this part of Rockefeller Center, and I literally work down the street.
I know. It's a really special place.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
This is so good. We're like eye level with the traffic coming in off of one of the most iconic avenues in America. I mean, this is so much fun.
I
So
know.
thank you for having me.
I know. I honestly pinch myself. I feel like every time I sit down in this booth or we sit down and start the show, it just feels so amazing to be here because Rockefeller Center is really the heart of New York City.
100%.
And
yes.
you work right across the street, so
I
you would know that too.
It's like, I'm sure I've seen you.
Yeah, I know.
One of the things that I love about coming into the city, and I'm not a city girl.
Yeah.
Like, I live in New Jersey, and I have to be able to, get to Target and those places. It's important to me. I have kids. So I'm not a big city girl at all, but I do love coming into the city. It has a heartbeat. Yeah. It's got a rhythm to it. It has people like yourself, and I can appreciate the city through your experiences and your eyes and your love of the city. I myself can only navigate on my best days, the sidewalks, walking them. Because it's like humanity coming at you and you're like, dodge, dodge.
I know.
Dodge, dodge. Dodge, dodge.
You really do have to be on your game here.
Yeah.
Harris and I were talking right before the podcast started about the fact that she doesn't feel like she feels the beat in New York City and walks in as kind of like playing dodgeball the whole way. And I walk into the city and I feel like, oh, thank gosh, I'm back. Now I know where everything is. I can orient myself. It's so funny how people have such different responses to this city. But neither of us grew up here. I mean, what I loved reading about you was the fact that you were an Army brat, which I have to be honest, has always captured my imagination. Tell me what it's like to grow up. I mean, you were born on an Army base.
Yes.
And then your childhood was spent around Army bases. What is that like?
Well, and around a warrior and an officer's wife, my parents. And so there were so many amazing times that are just uniquely American from my memory. And when I was born at Fort McPherson in Atlanta, Georgia, it was in the mid-'60s. And my dad was in the middle of 2 tours to Vietnam as a combat pilot. And at that time, the country was struggling.
Yeah.
And we were struggling with the identities of freedom and patriotism and equality and racial harmony and all the things that were being torn apart were also kind of strangely being put together in certain areas. And my father thought that by serving the nation, joining the military, he could be part of the fabric of this country that wove the broken parts back together again. And I have a lot of that in me. So I am eternally hopeful about where we are at all times, even when we are as divided, particularly racial and religiously and faithfully divided in this country as we are right now. I know that great things are possible. I'm very strong in my faith. And great things are possible because we're an amazing nation and Americans are special. We're different. When we go to places, I do believe that we put the bloom on the rose. Like, it's going to grow on its own, but when we walk in, it's a little bit more vibrant. I mean, it's our perspective on the world because we are free.
I love the optimism in your voice as you say this. Was this what you were like as a child too? Have you always seen the world like this?
I was a brat.
You were a brat.
Born, raised, and transferred.
Oh my God.
So I was a military
is that
brat.
what brat stands for?
Well, that's what my dad told me.
Oh, I had no
believe him.
idea.
And I've heard other military families, talk about that. So I was a brat. I was someone who grew up with great expectation on her life. And my dad, as I mentioned, was a combat pilot, and he was a leader. And my mom was a beautiful officer's wife, and I say beautiful in many ways. She was stunning at 5'11" and 125 pounds. God love her. She was very creative as a human being. She wanted people off post, off base, as we say, outside of our military barracks life. The quarters that we lived in at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, on base for a period of time. She wanted people in the wider community to understand what it's like to serve this nation.
Yeah.
She always felt like not enough people were serving, and that we didn't all have to serve in the same way, but we needed the same idea about keeping the country exceptional. And that takes all hands on deck. So during World Wars I and II, we saw the participation, particularly of women with their pantyhose for weaponry.
Rosie the Riveter, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, we were a part of whatever was going on. And she said, in peacetime, we need to be doing that too. So are there things that we can be doing around the world and walking out who we are without always having to send our fighting military? And as military families, she said, that's our claim.
Yeah.
So she would host families on post.
Who were not military families.
Civilian families. And my parents really wanted me to go to civilian schools, public schools. She wanted me in with public kids that saw America, and she wanted them to see me and me to see America. Like outside of the protection, which really you are when your dad is leadership commander on a base, leading battalion, whatever he's doing, your life has all of this expectation on it. I mean, I can't tell you how often I was asked about legacy.
Wow.
Are you joining the military? And at one point, I really wanted to be, but it wasn't going to be Army for me, like Dad. I wanted to fly, well, Tom Cruise. It's all his fault.
I wanted to every single one of us
to Top Gun, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I knew that there were a certain amount of years that you could do that. I mean, there is an expiration date for getting in there.
Yeah.
And my parents supported me either way. The point was, find a way to serve your fellow man and woman, just like the Bible calls us to do, to spend as much time as we can humble and serving people who can offer you nothing more than their company.
You talk about a legacy. That's amazing that even at a young age you would know that, and you would see that so visibly with your parents acting that out.
Yeah. And I was around a lot of people who were considered, upstanding and great American heroes. And that leadership, when my dad, post-war, was stationed at the Pentagon as support to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that staff was led by Colin Powell. And I was in grade school, and there's a shopping mall at the basement of the Pentagon. I don't know all the rules now.
I did not know that,
because
actually.
Since 9/11, I know certain things have changed, but Take Your Daughter to Work Day had a whole new meaning in my house.
Everyone's like, I'm going to my dad's law
I'm going
firm.
to the Pentagon, and I'll see y'all later as you go shop with Mom today. No, I'm kidding. Many, parents do all sorts of things. But I was really proud of him.
Yeah.
And my mom would make sure I was dressed well that day, and my ponytails had extra curl.
You were ready to see it all. I love it.
So that's like the born, raised, and transferred brat. I was also a bratty brat.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Because this mouth is a blessing and a curse. And I would get myself into trouble in grade school by correcting teachers.
How did that go over?
No. Did not make me popular with the, as I used to call them, the curriculum givers. Yeah.
I'm sure they really appreciated that too.
Yeah, right. I know. So growing up, I always had a confidence about me. I'm looking around and I see your book cover and it says, claim your confidence and unlock your superpower and create the life you want. Honey, I've been creating since I was 10.
It's so amazing.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I had confidence. But I also felt like I needed it because I was awkward and different. Because I did come from this non-civilian life. When I would give a book report that was out loud, in my household, my parents used to have me read the front page of the evening paper out loud at the dinner table to make sure that I had a rich vocabulary. And that was just a thing with them.
Yeah.
I mean, they said, you know, there's power in communication, and coming out of the civil rights movement, education was everything.
Right.
Well, not everybody could afford it. So I got free education at the kitchen table. So in about 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, when I was called upon to go before the class, oh my goodness, Lydia, no one wanted that less than my classmates. They were like, "Oh, look at her! Here she goes. Here
there
comes.
she is. Yeah.
It's the Black Walter Cronkite."
Oh my God.
I'm like, "Oh no!" And I would tell my parents that, and my mom's like, "Well, gender wrong, but possibility."
I love it.
know?
Oh my gosh, this is such amazing parenting. I feel like I'm soaking so much in from this. I have similar parents in that style that they were always sort of like, go forth and try it. You know, fail
why
as many
not?
times as you want, do whatever you want. And I also feel like I was born with a fair amount of confidence, but I also think that confidence over time can come and go. And that's certainly
it's
something
true.
I've learned in this podcast, because I look across at people who seem so confident, and they'll look back at me and say, "Oh, but gosh, if you could have seen me in 6th grade, I was falling apart every day." Or, you know, I had so much confidence going into this job, and then I got fired out of the blue, and all of a sudden I had no confidence. So I wonder, for you, you're 10 years old, you're giving the book report. Has that confidence stayed with you throughout? Or as you got a little older and the world opened up and you saw different things, did it become a little trickier to hold that confidence?
I love that question. And actually, it speaks to what I think my own superpower is, and that is resilience.
Yeah.
No, I have not always had that confidence.
Yeah.
I had a period of my life when I got my first anchor responsibilities. It didn't turn into a complete evening job for a couple of years. I went to Kansas City, which was my second television market. My first was in Greenville, North Carolina, Greenville, Washington, New Bern. I think it was like top 150, 125. It was a small market.
Yeah.
I get to Kansas City. It was top 30 market, which means, you know, there are millions of people who live there.
You're moving up.
Yeah, the Chiefs did not have a Super Bowl for many decades. God love them. I do remember when I went there, I was stalked. And I ended up in headlines of the Kansas City Star because I was the center of a court case where they caught a stalker. And I have never lost my confidence as much as I lost it then.
Oh, yeah.
I was being hunted. And this man broke into my apartment. I had just moved there. It was so humiliating. I thought people are going to think that I don't know how to run my own personal life. I didn't tell people for the longest time that this man had been following me, and it had come out of a relationship that had gone sour in my first TV market. He followed me from Greenville, North Carolina to Kansas City, and I had to explain this to, I'll never forget, I sat across from my news director, and he said, "You seem shaky. Are you okay?" And I said, "I am not okay.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to tell anybody." And he goes, "Harris, 1 million people see you at night. You don't think that
They're gonna
people
see?"
see?" He
Yeah.
said, "They do see, and I need to talk with you about what they see." I remember we were about to launch into an election season that next year, and he said, "How do I dispatch you? How do I put you places? Like, what does this look like? What do you need in terms of both security, but, you know, from the outside, but inside, how are you feeling?" And I just burst into tears. And Mike McDonald was the news director, and he was such a good man. He is such a good man. And he said, "So what's it like? Tell me." And I met with the general manager, Ed Piet. I remember it like it was yesterday. And they've both since retired. And he said, "So we want to put you up on a billboard, the first Black woman on a billboard. It's going to be amazing. Talk to us. Like, what happens now? You're going to be doing the 6 and 10 news. You're moving up. What happens now?" And so this went on for time. This was like 2 to 3 years in now.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm navigating this. I've had to go to the police department, get orders of protection papers. I'm still surviving this. But he broke into my apartment, and it was a 2-level, and they call this area of Kansas City Soho. I think every Soho has this vibe about it.
Yes.
It's like the coolest place in town and the whole thing. Anyway, there was one exit, and the bedroom and a little den and bathroom were on the top floor. You had to come down the stairs in that apartment to get out. So if he had come in to that door, there was no way out, and I was on the 4th floor. So it's not like I could jump out a window.
Oh my goodness.
So I didn't know what the noise was, but I heard a noise in the apartment. I got up and I said, "Well, whatever it is, I'm just going to run down the stairs. And that person's going to have to stop me." And that person was the stalker, and he did stop me. There was a lamp on a little table that got knocked over, so it got dark, and it had a cord on it, and he was coming for me. And there was like probably just seconds as he was wrestling with me, trying to get that around my neck. And the neighbors could hear me screaming and called 911.
Oh, Harris, my God.
The cops got there. He ran out that same open door, and I was just laying on the floor, like in the position of a chalk outline. I was paralyzed. And, you know, my parents would tell me, just like you had to get up in that moment, you have to get up in life now. Like, you can't let this man take everything, your career from you. You know, do you want us to come and stay with you? Like, what does it take to get you to fight? But you're going to have to see this through in court. You're going to become the headline. No one in news wants to become the news headline. It ruins your career. Or it makes you a victim in a way where you might not want that career anymore. And I had great management. And that was Fox 4, WDAF TV in Kansas City. And they said, we're right there with you. Keep going. We're not going to take you off. This isn't frightening us. Yeah. We'll do what we have to do. We'll change some rules about people entering. He had entered the lobby. There was video of him over that time. Mm-hmm. I mean, this guy was so brazen. And after the trial was over, the Associated Press had picked up the trial as it was going on. I had people across the country asking me to come and speak. The city of White Plains, New York had a college. And they said, we want you to come and talk about stalking laws. And I began to talk about how to retain your power and be resilient. And that was never the intention. I thought I'd be talking about journalism, but what people wanted to know, and you know this so well, Lydia, people want to know how to figure out the puzzle of life, because it isn't from age 10 to now that it's the same and perfect and whatever you had. I mean, even Superman had kryptonite.
Yeah. It's
and
true.
that was my kryptonite, although, come on, he wasn't real. Sometimes, I don't know. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. But that was my kryptonite, was not being in control of my own life.
Yeah.
And how do I get that back? And it was step by step. It was sharing my story. It was lifting other people up. It was doing exactly what I was taught, helping those who can offer you nothing more than their company, giving people the hope, navigating, okay, what is a stalking law? And why is that always tied to a different kind of law? And why do you have to go to court with your kids always for orders of protection? And you know the perp is going to be there. And, you know, and so I went to different states. And as I was making a difference, I was healing.
Yeah.
And I wrote a book about that, Breaking News, God Has a Plan. But the book mainly was about like my struggle with God.
Yeah, of course.
Because I was trying to figure it out. Like, why would you do this in the middle of my career? What don't you love me?
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, I had a resilience that's really hard to break.
Well, I always believe that over the course of your life, when these tests, the bigger they get over time, and I've had in the past couple of years a huge test of my own, who anyone who's listened to this podcast would know about. And what I say to everyone is the craziest part about it is that you look back on it and you realize that you go through something that is truly horrific. And on top of everything else, it teaches you how strong you really are.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter if you're lying on that floor, you're sitting here now. And that journey is what you bring with you. And that if you have the ability to do it, which you clearly do, which I truly believe is a gift, is that you have the ability to change other people's lives. Because so many people take that trauma and go inward. Yeah. And if you can be outward about it, I'm sure people have come up to you ever since then to tell you their story.
They do.
About stalking, but probably about health issues and other things that have happened in their lives, right?
Yeah, it made me a better journalist. And it you know, young journalists are always chided for going up to the mother who's just lost her children in a fire fictitiously. This is like a lot of news directors will use this as an example. Never ask the question, how do you feel?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Find a way to let that person open up. So for my New York Times bestseller, which stayed on that list for weeks, no one could have forecast that. Faith Still Moves Mountains came out, and this time last year, these 19 stories were a national conversation.
Yeah.
They're about other people. And I still, to this day, have other people telling me their stories. And so I just traveled recently on our Fox Nation app. I have something that's about to drop about a woman named Lisa McVeigh, who was kidnapped and raped when she was 17. For 26 hours, this man tortured her.
Oh, God.
She figured out how to convince him to let her go.
Wow.
Didn't realize who he was until weeks later, that he was a serial killer. She was the only one he spared, and that 2 women died after he let her
I
go.
have full body chills when you tell me this story. My gosh.
She now is a police officer in Tampa Bay. And so last Friday, I had gotten the privilege of riding in her squad car and her being on the other side of trauma and trouble and assault and desperate times, to where she now helps heal others. And she said it's been 37 years of a continuation of, how am I going to do this day? How am I going to do this day?
Yeah.
How am I going to do this day?
Wow.
And that's how all survivors are. And the resilience that she shows is in a different way.
Yeah.
Because those scars are forever, because she's willing to open up herself over and over and over and over and over again to hear the stories of other sex assault and torture survivors, rape survivors who are young. It is amazing. I think that the credibility that a human being must have when trying to help others only has to come from life experience.
Truly.
God doesn't spare any of us something.
Everybody gets tested in their own way.
In their own way. And what we have to promise each other is that we don't hold the other person or other people to our own litmus tests and judgment.
Yeah.
And that we're willing to meet them right where they are and say, you know what? My pain, my fear, my doubts, they're all different. Yours are too legitimate.
Yeah.
They are legitimate.
I love that. Well, so tell me a little bit more about the news career for you, because at the beginning we were talking about, you're going to be the next Walter Cronkite, and your mom's like, maybe. Could be.
No, that's what she called me. I never thought that.
Well, no, you're okay. So you didn't think it, but maybe on the inside you did, because you had a lot of confidence.
And the kids in class.
And the kids in
no,
class.
I never thought that.
But was that what you wanted to be on the news? Was that always something that you saw in front of you from an early age?
I just wanted to be someone who could use her voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I always dreamed about doing the evening news. By the time I was a teenager, that's what I wanted. But honestly, I loved reading to the blind. I loved doing things that my parents kind of ushered into my life. And I found that, when it came time for, my mom always entered into local bake sales, because she was just a phenomenal baker. She would always want me to introduce her. So
she was like, come on over.
Yeah. So, and I now have a daughter who can do that. So it's kind of cool. I'm like, yeah, I'm really proud of that skill. But I don't know that I wanted to do anything other than collect other people's stories and tell them. And Walter Cronkite seems so far away from anything that would be possible. I mean, to speak with millions of people, whether it was in local news or in national and cable, no matter what venue it was, it would take a master communicator. And so I think I just wanted to be able to first write. I mean, when I got out of college at University of California at Santa Barbara, I had a degree in communications, not journalism. And I had also studied business economics. So I then went to UCLA for extension courses, and I was really addicted to film. But like documentary type stuff, although I love comedy. I used to go to live comedy shows, and I mean, it's because those are master communicators.
Oh, absolutely.
To get ready, they play this game called Zip, Zap, Zup. And at like 6, my now 17-year-old could win a round with adults.
That's
amazing.
amazing.
It's just that control over communication, and I was just always interested in that. And so I began as a freelance writer for the LA Weekly right out of college. I think it was $25 an article.
Oh.
Yeah, no one's getting rich, honey.
You're like, so now
that
I
was
will
the
walk
80s.
to work.
Yeah, that was the 80s. I did actually. And I truly loved was that I could write and people would read that and they would find something valuable. I was the real estate writer. And just so many parts of my life do come together now because I'm always teaching my team, just like a real estate column, sell me what's going on a bit. Like, viewers are not watching TV. They're cleaning the kitchen. They're at work. They've got their device down. They're not looking at that screen. The more important it is, you've got to figure out how to get that person to look at that screen and tie it to something that they need to know and that makes their life better. Do not waste their time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so those were early lessons from just writing news copy and being around some of the best news writers in the business. And I love that. So then I started covering some crime and some other things. I got my first internship at KCOP, Channel 13 in LA.
I love that every single time I have anyone who's been in the news, they always go through one by one all the stations that they worked at. It's amazing because you remember it.
You remember. And you know why? Because people gave you the grace of watching you.
Yeah.
And you met them because you were in local news. And people would tell you at like the Piggly Wiggly, you know what? My town is pronounced Olathe. It's not whatever you said on TV the other day.
Oh, amazing. And this is pre-social
Kansas,
media.
by the way.
So like that's an amazing thing to think about because it's true. I mean, now you could literally, I mean, I can't even imagine what people say on social media because I'm sure with audiences
the comments
large,
are brutal.
The comments are brutal. But at that point, you know, it was probably, you know, some like old Jane at the supermarket who wanted to pull you aside and be like, I really loved that green top that you wore on.
Oh, people still do that sort of thing too. They're fascinated by our shoes on Outnumbered. But, you know, remembering those call letters for me also has a reason because I didn't work in very many markets before I came here. And I also think that it is just a moment of pride. It was the first merch I ever owned outside of camo from my dad because you want to wear the station stuff. And now I sort of go, no, I'm all into latte.
Yeah. You're like, I don't need it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I don't know if the station colors really are part of my palette.
So how did you end up here? What was that call like? I mean, tell me the sort of months leading up to getting a big job in New York City on the news, because that's the penultimate, right? When you're in a local market, that's what you want, right?
Oh, it's true. So I went from LA as an intern to the CBS affiliate in Greenville, North Carolina, to Fox in Kansas City, to ABC News in Minneapolis. And from there, they had a reorganization and they didn't choose me. And I had been doing the evening news and I had been married maybe 3 or 4 months. And I looked at my brand new newlywed groom and I said, are we in trouble that I don't have a job? And he said, well, we're not in trouble, but I think this is a time for you to choose what you want. We have a lot of freedom right now. And I was like, well, I married the right guy.
But in that moment, too, having not been chosen, like we go back to the confidence piece a lot, and I always love those moments when things didn't go right. Was that like a wounded ego thing, or were you sort of like,
let me tell
get
you
me
what
out of
happened. So they didn't choose me, but I won 2 more Emmys.
I know. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, because the season wasn't over yet.
Oh my gosh.
And they paid me through the end of my contract, and my station submitted my work.
Oh my goodness. There you go.
I mean, I don't even know what to say about that, but I had a great news director. So. And they wanted to do different things. In local news, it is not unheard of. So no, I never had that moment, but I did have that moment of letting my new spouse down. And when he said, no, we have freedom. Now, what are we doing? And the local stations had asked if he wanted to look at a weekend anchor job because he was an investigative reporter. And I like to tell people that I got my Tony before I got my first Emmy. And he made me a better live shot artist. He really did. I mean, it became artistry, storytelling, unscripted, without saying the same words over and over again and making it matter for people who might be afraid of what you're saying. He taught me range like I'd never learned it before. So, and he's younger. I'm a cougar, so I'll just come with that. Like I should have known these things, but it took a young man to teach me. And then we left and he stayed behind for a few months to finish out his contract. And I got a call to come to New York and do an interview because I didn't want to do local news. I wanted out of the news for a little bit, clean my palate. What's here? My agent said, what about a current affair? And I'm like, the news, like...
Oh, I remember a current affair. Yes.
Like it's kind of like celebrity driven.
Right.
It's a little salacious.
Yeah.
Remember, there were a bunch of them at the time. There was Inside Edition.
Right.
There were, these news magazines, national news.
E.T.,
I said,
right? Was
yeah,
that one?
Entertainment Tonight, that sort of thing. That was probably more celebrity driven than even the harder side, which was Inside Edition and a current affair. And they said, you'll start out as a correspondent. Just go in and interview. I came in, and even on the coldest day in that month of January, it was warmer than most days in Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
And the news director sold it this way: we're the Florida of the North.
Really?
Like,
I don't
really?
know.
I don't know. And then I think that year they got 3 feet of snow or something after I moved here. But I started out, and I'd say not even 3 months, 4 months into that job, Natalie Holloway disappeared.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And I had gone to Aruba on some other story. I think I was chasing Christian Slater or something. I don't know what I was doing. Some celebrity. And I was failing because I wasn't into the celebrity thing as much as I thought I would be. And that's another thing. Say the word fail. Can we all say it? And how did I know I was failing? Because it wasn't my best writing. And I wasn't sure if the audience was touched by what I was writing, because that's not what I did.
Yeah.
But it takes sometimes doing something that's a fish out of water. And I so believe in the good Lord that that's exactly where I was supposed to be. I remember going to the local Holiday Inn that was right next to what we call the team hotel on the beach in Aruba, which is where our team was. And it'll make more sense in a moment. There was a blonde woman who was sobbing at the front desk. And that was Natalie Holloway's mom, Beth.
Oh, my gosh.
And I walked up and I introduced myself and I said, if there's anything you need, tell me. And she wrote about that in the book. I sent her a basket of spa products. I wasn't working for a news organization.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have you got to give me that first interview in me.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't there. I had been chasing celebrities. It was more like I had spent the night before Lil' Kim went to prison.
Yeah.
Right? She cut a video and I was with her till 3 a.m. and then she had to go to prison. I mean, that was my life.
That was your life.
That's a real story.
That was a very different life.
So, but in that moment, we were 2 Americans. And I wasn't a mom yet, but that pain was visceral.
Oh, God.
And I did end up sitting down for an amazing interview, and we did specials for a current affair. And I stayed on that island for 29 days, and it became known, the hotel next door to the Holiday Inn, as the team hotel because the media descended from all over the world to cover that story.
Yeah.
I stayed in the same room, and on my floor were Geraldo Rivera, all these people, and then that's how I met the Fox and cable people. I'd never met them.
Oh, my gosh.
And Geraldo and Greta Van Susteren, what a storyteller, right? And Larry King had me on his show. And so from there, I would come on satellite into Larry King's show. And people, like my mom was like, I just saw you on Larry King.
Oh,
Did you meet him? I'm like, well, it's satellite. But Fox was sending a lot of people on the ground. So I was meeting all of these big names in the industry and hard news. And I said, and after that, I got a job at Fox. And I said, okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go.
And that was it.
Current Affair was part of our Fox Entertainment division, but it was so separate. It was broadcast. It wasn't on cable. I didn't know any of those people. So when I went in for the interview, I was like, what is this going to be like? And they said, well, can you still read a prompter? And I'm like, of course, I hosted the show. That was the other thing, because I was the talent that they sent from a Current Affair. I was doing full shows from Aruba. So like the host wasn't even doing them.
Literally picking up all these skills that you can apply the minute that they ask you. You're ready.
Have yet.
Yeah.
I didn't have the ability to be nimble that way, to go from a show that's mostly scripted, and a Current Affair was with scripted intros, to, okay, we're going to go from that. We're going to wipe away the teleprompter and just tell us what you did today and who you interviewed. I mean, it became like a reporter's notebook. And that was the biggest story of its time.
Right.
Yeah, at least for a year or two at that point. And what was so amazing, though, is once I jumped back into news, I did it differently.
You learned the news skills.
I learned so much about reaching people and about cutting through the anchor talk and all of that. And I dressed my style. I was who I was. And I was looking forward to motherhood. And I said, you know what? I can be a mom now because I'm not chasing so hard. I feel like I am.
That's
I'm
amazing.
not chasing to be. I am.
You are who you are.
Yeah.
That's a great story. And so when you had your first daughter, because you have 2 daughters, what was that like? At that point, how long had you been working at Fox News?
Maybe a year. So I joined Fox in December of 2005, and the Natalie Holloway story broke in like May, June of 2005. So as we entered that year, I was still a freelancer for Fox. I was doing the evening cut-ins. I was the only person who'd ever done all of them across prime time. They used to split it up among anchors because those were the most coveted hours. Big names, Bill O'Reilly, so on and so forth, on at Fox, and they were going up against the big names at other stations or other networks, rather. And so those were very coveted hours, and I would get a minute and a half off the top, in the middle, and at the end of some of the most watched television for over a decade. And I didn't do it that long, but it was really, really firmly in number one, those hours between like 6 and midnight. And when Bella came along, I took my maternity leave, but I was able to go back to work because she slept much of that time.
Yeah.
And I had help from my mom. I was an older mom. I had started later, so I didn't want, like, everybody's like, oh, girl, you got to get a nanny. And I'm like, no, not outsourcing. I did have some help, but my husband said, that's it. I'm going to work from home. I'm going to do something different now.
Yeah.
You know, and he opened up a public relations firm. Well, first he worked for one to see how it would work. And then he opened it up. And part of it was in our tiny apartment, which was smaller than the apartment that I had in Kansas City as a single woman. So,
Welcome to New York.
So we lived in West New York, New Jersey, which is right on the Hudson River. And I would take the ferry to work. I could walk, I don't even think it was 100 yards from our building. And I was a happy first mom. I just had a lot of those moments where I really didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
One of my girlfriends came by one day early on in my maternity leave. And God bless her. She said, I'm here. I want you to go take a shower.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? She goes, Harris, look at you. She said, if you could ever attract any paparazzi, and I'm like, well, that'll never happen. but if my career ever got to the point that I could, she's like, what would they see? Look at you. And I'm like, oh no. And I looked at the mirror and I didn't know who that creature was.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? It is so amazing to love someone so much that you almost lose yourself in those moments.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And then it was time for me to become the person that I would want her to know.
Yeah. I do love hearing that and hearing you say that and the way you phrase that, because I've said to a lot of women who go from careers and then they start having children, and there's always that struggle, right? With, should I be doing this? Is this what I saw from my mother? What does this life look like for me, and how do I create it? And, you know, people talk endlessly about the mom guilt, but one thing that I will never forget when I came back from my maternity leave with my first child was walking back into the place that I'd worked since I was in college. And I cried the whole way after I left. I cried the whole way after I left her to get back to work, and, you know, holding my pump, holding all the things. And I sat down at my desk and I kind of looked around and I was like, oh, right. This is who I am too.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in that, because it's great to have the full adult life and be happy in your adult life and also be a mom and have those two things sync up. And I've never forgotten that feeling.
I mean, we're
wife.
a lot of things.
We are a lot of things.
Yes.
There's so many other things.
We
too,
are a whole Swiss knife, honey. A whole Swiss Army knife. We are every blade.
I know.
You just pull us out and we are exactly what you need and what you want. I will say this.
And sometimes a little sharp around the edges. Just like
but
a Swiss Army
always
knife.
sharp in the mind.
Yes, well
I think
said.
that's cool.
Well said, Harris.
Something that I tell young moms, you can have anything you want, but you cannot have everything.
Right.
So there came a time when, you know, my husband and I said, you know, we are older. Wouldn't we want Bella to have a sibling?
Mm-hmm.
And when that moment came along, that was a big decision. That was 2 years later, almost 2 years, because they're like 2 years and 4 months apart. And that was a part of me that had to show such supreme growth, because it's one thing to, you know, come back to work. And I was allowed to come back part-time because those hours were not an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
Across prime time. But what I realized was how much free time I had with one.
Right.
And when the second one came along, that put a lot of stress on my marriage.
Yeah.
And I tell young mothers, he matters too.
Yeah.
So you cannot have everything.
Yeah.
You can have anything, but there's no such thing as having it all.
Yeah.
So I did get help. And then we finally bought a house, a small house. You know, everything, the word small has to preface it.
Of course.
Because we're on the East Coast.
Welcome to the East Coast.
I know, right? But we had a little yard and we drove a minivan, Which Tony said he'd never do. That's my husband. But
I have not given in yet.
We had 3 of them, actually, and we just got rid of one. We were like, okay, it's our 3rd minivan. I have to move on now. I'm in my 50s. But yeah, I mean, you do have to figure out, okay, well, what are we giving up? And the part of our life together that we gave up, we don't miss anymore. I mean, I love getting together with friends, but I also don't go out drinking and stay out till midnight. That's not my life.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be different.
Yeah,
as
and
long
you
as you
evolve.
feel like you're at your best.
Of course.
You know?
I've always said to people, you're never who you were the day before. And that shouldn't be your goal in life.
That's a great line.
You know, the truth is really that the inside is what matters. But I don't think I ever look back. I know people always say this, like, oh, if I could go back to my 20s. I'm like, oh, I loved my 20s. I had a great 20s. I don't need to be 20 years old again. I don't need to be 25.
Ooh,
I don't need to be
no.
28. All of those things are accumulated learning that you bring to where you are now. And so for you, you're now at the top of the game, at the top network, at the top cable news show in the middle of the day. And I'm wondering, what is it like to go into that office and know that you are at the top? And where do you see yourself going next?
I'm spiritually on my walk, and I don't take anything for granted. And I say my prayers in the morning and I say them at night. And there are times when I walk into my office and I think, I'm going to pray over my mouth today so that I can get things right on TV so that Americans feel served. I want to be someone that people can trust. There's a lot of hard news out there now. And I want to lead not 1, but 2 teams. The show with my name on it is also number 1 in its time slot, the Faulkner Focus, across cable. And I want to be someone who can lead teams and have the ability to be a real person.
Yeah.
And that's my goal. And I feel incredibly blessed to even have the option to try.
One question I've always thought about when it comes to being a real person and being a mom and all these things is, as you said, you deal with hard news. How do you deal with some of the stuff that you have to see in the news every day? Like when you see something that's incredibly upsetting or something like that, how do you walk out of that studio and go home? Because sometimes I feel like I watch the news and I get really upset, and then it feels like it carries into things. And I have friends who are newscasters, and it always strikes me that there is an ability for you to present that news and then not internalize it. Is that how it works? I don't know, or maybe it's just practice.
I think it's different for everybody. Yeah. You know, I mentioned some of the pivots in my career. And one thing I learned from being around Natalie Holloway's mom for a long period of time, there are different stages of grieving, as people say, but there are also different stages of surviving. And I think that even as a communicator, in some ways, I'm surviving those moments too. And I'm really honest with the audience. When Sandy Hook happened, I was on the air with a team of people at Fox, but I was at a news position in the newsroom where we had a special camera called the breaking news desk, and that is my specialty. And so when it came time to take a look live, gosh, it's hard for me to even talk about it now.
It's hard for me to hear you say these words right now. I know.
And we saw the hearse pull into the elementary school parking lot. I said, okay, we're going to take a moment now because I've just had a number given to me from sources on the ground, and I know how many people have been shot and killed. And when they open the back of that hearse, you're going to see a small stretcher. And I thought, why would they bring a hearse to a scene where the ambulances should still be working?
Yeah.
26 dead, including children, young children, 5 and 6 years old, and teachers inside that building. And it hurt. Like, come on. Yeah. Who isn't hurt by that? And I remember getting off the air and going to the women's room and just praying and asking the Lord to be with all of the people in that community. I prayed for the shooter's family. I believe he killed his mother before he went to the school. And when I got home, it was late that night. I mean, that was like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, it was late. And it went on. I mean, we were on the air for so long. And one baby, Danica, my youngest, insisted on being in a toddler bed even though she couldn't even walk yet. She wanted to be with her sister. Yeah. So we didn't even have to put the railings up because she wasn't going anywhere. And my other daughter was in her little Princess Queen. It had like a little, it looked like a princess lived in it with like a little sheer over the top. And it was really pretty, hanging down like curtains over her bed. And they had a purple rug between them, and I got down and I prayed so hard I put my face on the floor.
Yeah.
I was so grateful to come home.
I felt exactly the same way
and
that day.
They were there.
Yeah.
And I thought this is something that many parents today won't feel, not just in the Sandy Hook disaster, that tragedy brought on by a monster who killed people.
Yeah.
But there were people all over the world, mothers grieving, fathers grieving. And how blessed am I to be right here with Bella and Danica. I can only imagine that God has put me in this position to communicate. He never promised me I wouldn't feel it, and I'm so grateful that I feel it.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of a better place to end this conversation. And I think that anyone who listened to that would understand why you are so good at what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
appreciate
you
that.
for
You're
sharing
great at what
it.
you do, too.
No, I thank you for sharing that. I felt like I was about to burst into tears, which, again, feeling is an emotion like anything else. I always say to my children, sadness and happiness are both emotions.
It's true. It's true.
You
so
feel one because you feel the other.
If you'll allow me to end on a happy note,
Yes,
Outnumbered
please.
turns 10. Yeah. I am the OOG, the original Outnumbered gangsta. I'm the only original co-host on there, and I'm a co-creator of the television program that brings so many women together.
Yeah.
And the man in the middle is Outnumbered.
Tell me the conversation and how Outnumbered happened.
Well, I wanted to do a show to break up the daytime, so I pitched it to our chairman at the time. And I said, look, we need something in the noon hour. You've got straight news all across the board. It's got a little sag in the middle there. Mm-hmm. You're not rating. Why don't we do something different? Mm-hmm. So I got the go-ahead, the green light in the budget to do a pilot for a show, and it was called The News Cafe. And I said, we'll do it in the actual cafeteria where people go from our network, and you'll see like some of our famous people on TV there, and blah, 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 blah. I was so shiny and new 10 years ago and so naive.
So many fantastic ideas.
So we did one pilot, and upper management loved it. Mm-hmm. Ownership loved it. But we can't hear the people speaking. And what I had not figured out is if you shoot something in a news cafe, everybody has to eat on plastic.
Oh, no.
And they can't chew aloud and they can't talk. And I'm like, okay. But they even said, let's try it again. Let's do some modification. Yeah, no, it's not working. And then I repitched, we talked, and then a group of us got together. And I can't remember which exec it was who said, we just need a hook. And that's the thing. And so there was born this idea of, well, what else is on The View? Well, they have a lot of women. Mm. Well, who's got a man? And then in the beginning, we called him One Lucky Guy because, and no one ever asked me this, but this is why, because he was lucky to be around that many power women.
Oh, I got that immediately.
Yeah,
I got that immediately.
I know. I think other people were trying to put something nefarious or nasty on it, and I'm like, okay, that's where your mind is.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't even think about that. I lucky guy to be there.
And so we called him the OLG, but now he's just our guest in the middle. And Outnumbered can be your perspective. We do a lot of politics because politics is news. We do a lot of cultural stuff now. And it's fun. It's just it's a happy moment in the middle of the day. And we're nimble. Something happens and
off you go.
I cover the breaking news mostly on the show. And we'll go to whatever it is. And we get that done. And nobody else has that on TV. Talk shows do not navigate to live news.
Yeah.
Yeah. An anchor comes on from someplace else. Anchor space.
Yeah. Got to move it around.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you said that about Outnumbered because I started Claim Your Confidence. I did the first year, and it's all women. It's 52 episodes, all women.
Ooh.
And then Joe and I were having a conversation about the second season, and I had a friend who'd been through quite a lot in his own career, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a guy's perspective? So now once a month, we have one guy, and then we have three women.
And he's outnumbered.
Yes, exactly. But it's 1-to-1, but he's outnumbered in the month of that, podcast.
Right.
Exactly. So I think it's always fun to have conversations. I love the idea that we can have open conversations about anything with anyone at any time, which is what you do all the time. So I want to say thank you so much for coming. It has been such a delight and a pleasure to listen to your stories and to learn more about you. So tell us a little bit more about where we can find you, where we can support you, and what else is coming up.
Well, for anybody who is going through anything, pick up Faith Still Moves Mountains. It's on Amazon. It remains every now and then it'll pick up steam again and end up back on lists. It is a story of miraculous healing power of prayer. And there are all sorts of people who have shared their many of them are contemporary stories ripped from the headlines. And I've interviewed those people on how they use their faith in times of strength and weakness to bounce back, to be resilient. So that would be the first thing from my heart. If you need a place to start healing anything in your life, if you want to usher something in, faith still moves mountains. That comes from a verse in Matthew, faith moving mountains. But I explore it and say that it still does. Don't lose faith. 11 a.m. Eastern is the Faulkner Focus. And celebrating its 10th anniversary, big birthday, is Outnumbered. I go down some glass stairs and I join them. And at noon Eastern, Outnumbered. So we are together.
Well, fantastic. Everyone I know will be listening and tuning in.
Yay.
And I want to say just very quickly to our listeners, I always love to leave with a thought or a question for everyone out there. And you've touched upon resilience so many times throughout this interview. So I would say to the people who are listening today, I hope that whatever you're going through, you've heard this story. For those of you who've listened for a long time, you know mine, and you know that you can be resilient and you have it in us. Every single one of us does. So stay strong. Have a wonderful week. I'm Lydia Fenet. This is Claim Your Confidence, coming to you from Newsstand Studios. Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Rockefeller Center. And I look forward to being with you again next week.